Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And Happy New Year. We're back from our Christmas break, and while we didn't see all of the royals doing their traditional outing to church on Christmas Day, they more than made up for it with a lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah, there is plenty to talk about. I guess let's return to the end of 2021 before we go into 2022, because towards the end of last year, Meghan Markle had a second victory over Associated Newspapers, the publisher of the Mail on Sunday, after they appealed her previous win on both the privacy and copyright aspects of her case. And part of the agreement was that the newspaper would print a front page apology, which they did
on what I call Boxing Day and what you call St. Stephen's Day.
That's what it's called.
The 26th of December, for anyone who doesn't know.
Whatever you call it, it is traditionally one of the quietest days of the year for news.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting day to choose to run that apology on the front page.
But in addition to running this front page apology, and I think they also had to run something on the homepage of the website, the Mail on Sunday also paid Meghan just £1 in damages for invading her privacy. So that's a nominal sum that they paid and agreed with Meghan to avoid a lengthy argument over the extent of damages Meghan has suffered as a result of the invasion of her privacy.
Yeah, and I mean, the £1 was only part of what she got out of this, but that was the big focus. Like, all the headlines over here were about how Meghan was paid just £1, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Stevens, who's a media lawyer, talked to The Guardian about it, and he said that it's possible that this nominal settlement suggests some kind of weakness in that aspect, the privacy aspect of Meghan's case. He said, normally for that kind of invasion of privacy, you would expect £75,000 to £125,000. It does show that the curation of her reputation was an area where she had effectively invaded her own privacy. Now, obviously, this isn't saying that her case was so weak that she shouldn't have won. It's just that, I guess when you're a public figure or a celebrity or a royal or whatever, it becomes a lot harder to quantify the damages in that kind of instance because there are areas of your life which you have made public and do make public. So agreeing a nominal sum like £1 means that you don't have to get into all that. And as we've seen with all the appeals, when these arguments run too long, the only winner is the Daily Mail or the Mail on Sunday because they can write about it.
Yeah, and this nominal sum was set out in court documents that also now formally confirm that the newspaper, the Mail on Sunday, and its sister website, the Mail Online, have accepted defeat and will not be taking this case to a Supreme Court appeal. So that's it. It's done.
Such good news, because I remember we were saying, just after they lost this appeal, they were immediately rumblings of
another appeal.
Yeah, the Supreme Court appeal, and it was oh God, do we have to go through this all again? But this was brilliant news. I guess the reason why everyone talked about the £1 is because they've also agreed to pay a confidential sum in damages for the copyright infringement, which was the other part of the case. And they also face having to cover a substantial part of Meghan's legal costs, which could be more than £1 million, according to The Guardian, or more than $2 million, according to Harper's Bazaar. But we don't know these sums. They haven't been stated. So it's a lot handier for, I guess, newspapers and stuff to talk about the sum that they do know.
It is a better headline.
Yeah.
But a spokesperson for Meghan confirmed to Harper's Bazaar that the payout for copyright infringement is substantial, and as she had previously said, it will be donated to an anti-bullying charity in due course. So we might get some insight into how much it is after the donation is made. But for now, as Tom said, there's only these kind of estimates floating around. Sure, it is very substantial.
Yeah, I bet. And yeah, just generally a great outcome, and hopefully we can wrap all that up now for Meghan.
Yeah, and I think, as Meghan had said, it wasn't about her making money from it. She said it was about the principle of doing what is right and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure she wasn't too bothered about the £1 headlines.
Oh, yeah. I mean, from what I understand about it, she could have insisted on more money. They could have gone into a negotiation for more money, and they didn't. So clearly it doesn't matter that much to her. But anyway, the other big news that we've had has been the start of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's civil suit against Prince Andrew.
Yeah, because over that week between Christmas and New Year, there was also the big news that Ghislaine Maxwell had been found guilty on 5 out of the 6 sex trafficking charges that she was in court over, which was great news.
Yeah.
And I think there were like some questions, particularly from royal watchers, about what was going on with that case in terms of how it affected Prince Andrew, and whether Virginia Roberts Giuffre, the woman who has accused Andrew and who has also been a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, how she was involved. Because, as we talked about a lot last year, she has brought this civil suit against Andrew. Virginia wasn't involved in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial at all, even though she was mentioned a few times in court. And Andrew was only tangentially mentioned. As we said on the podcast, there wasn't anything particularly interesting. I think a pilot mentioned that he'd been on the plane or something like that, something that we knew already. But there was obviously that photo of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein sitting on the bench at the Queen's estate in Balmoral, which was a very damaging photo, of course.
Yeah, and got like a lot of airtime all around the world. But like now that Ghislaine has been found guilty, it should certainly affect how people think about Andrew, if they're not already, thinking that about him. After all, he was very insistent in his Newsnight interview that he wasn't really good friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He was really only in those circles because of his very close friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, I think that's worth reminding people of, because he was really sticking to that in the interview.
Like, we don't know what the sentencing is on Ghislaine yet, but like it looks like she is going to be in prison for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be like 65 years.
Yeah. But anyway, the trial, Ghislaine's trial is over, and this week has seen the start of Virginia's civil suit against Andrew. We've spoken a bit before about how his legal strategy has changed over the last year or so, and the Sunday Times has a good piece that summarises the whole situation with a few kind of juicy extra details.
Yeah, like it's a very good piece. I'd recommend reading the whole thing, but some of the things that stood out to me were this detail that any advisors who would question Andrew about his links to Epstein were sent packing with a curt "fuck off out of my office," which, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God. I mean, when you hear things like that about Andrew, it's both kind of like shocking, but also just marries so well with what you believe him to be like.
Everything we've heard about him.
Yeah, it all paints this picture. But quite surprisingly, I found in this piece, one former aide said, "I never found him to be a nasty person. He's not thick. He's naive. He's not arrogant. He's a product of his own upbringing, which is one of massive privilege." I mean, like, if you have to have someone go on the record to say that you aren't thick,
and that you're 60 years old, but you're naive.
Yeah. I mean, it's very bleak, but very funny, I thought.
He's just a victim of his own privilege.
Oh, poor Andrew.
I think, though, this piece is particularly striking because of the specifics it gives about Andrew's team and the legal strategy. The main kind of takeaway being that he has gotten consistently terrible advice throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, like, as we know, he abandoned the whole never complain, never explain motto pretty early on. He did that awful for him, Newsnight interview.
It was almost impossible for me to sweat.
And after that, he kind of built up this team, which was headed by barrister Stephen Ferguson, who's represented criminal organisations and also the UK's most violent criminal, Charles Bronson. The team consisted of Claire Montgomery, who was a lawyer who worked to spare the Chilean dictator Pinochet from extradition from Britain, PR veteran Mark Gallagher, and this guy called Gary Bloxham, who styled himself as a co-head of the dispute resolution team.
Yeah, and the Sunday Times dubs him Good News Gary, which is a nickname he apparently earned because of his quite unusual tactic that he had for dealing with Andrew, which was that he only ever presented Andrew with the best case scenario, that even when things were going disastrously wrong, a source said, he will always focus on the upside, not the downside. He's continually promising the Duke that this is all about to be over and he will be able to get back to public duties soon.
It's so funny. I mean, like, no matter what anyone says, I think you'd have to be both thick and arrogant to believe that.
That does line up, though, with, over the past couple of years, we kept getting these stories about, sort of suggesting that pretty soon Andrew would be coming back.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, and this is also what they've been reassuring Andrew this whole time.
Yeah. But to focus on Mark Gallagher on the PR side of Andrew's strategy, his main job, it seemed, was to preside over doomed efforts to discredit Virginia. And you might remember one of his particular gems, which was this claim that the photo of Andrew and Virginia together had clearly been doctored because the fingers weren't fat enough. So this claim was like widely discredited almost immediately.
Yeah, and what I thought was notable was that apparently Sarah Ferguson was also involved with this. According to the Sunday Times, apparently Fergie briefed against Virginia and approached journalists to ask them to dig into her. And in 2020, the Sunday Times reports the Daily Mail was offered an insight into Andrew's diaries to help discredit Virginia, which then completely backfired because seeing those diaries meant that the Daily Mail could run the headline, "Exposed, Duke's sex slave alibi falls apart."
And the diary also placed Andrew in New York at the time that Virginia claims he abused her at Epstein's mansion. And it's that specific alleged incident that allowed Virginia to file this civil suit rather than the one in London, because obviously the one in New York is within the jurisdiction. But like, this is like such a farce to me. It's like, this guy Gallagher is doing such a bad job, we better bring in our best operative, Sarah Ferguson, to help out, and then like it all just is this huge massive catastrophe for them.
Yeah, and I couldn't really tell, but it seemed like Fergie may allegedly have been involved in all the stuff we were hearing about Virginia procuring slutty girls and her being a sex kitten and all that kind of horrible stuff that we were hearing about her last year, which is extremely ugly behaviour if that is what happened. But anyway, all of this meant that Good News Gary just continued to advise the wall of silence for Andrew, which you may remember involved him running away to Balmoral to try avoid being served with court papers.
Literally hiding behind his mummy. But it's Gary's latest tactic, which has been on most people's minds over the last week, because apparently it was his idea to use Jeffrey Epstein's 2009 settlement agreement with Virginia to get Andrew off the hook and potentially have the civil suit dismissed. So this is an agreement that was signed in 2009 and stated that in return for $500,000, Virginia would, quote, release and forever discharge second parties and any other person or entity who could have been included as a potential defendant from all manner of action and actions of Virginia Roberts, including state or federal cause and causes of action.
Yeah, we've talked about this settlement before. It's the same settlement agreement that led to Virginia's suit against Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, that suit for battery being dismissed. And there was a big deal made about this agreement being unsealed so that the judge could decide on how relevant it was for the Andrew case. But to be clear, there's nothing in it that directly references Andrew. Like, he's not specifically named in this the way that Alan Dershowitz is.
Yeah. And it's a bold tactic for Andrew's lawyers to be using. Like, the Guardian has a piece by Andrew Anthony in which he says, in other words, it appears his possible culpability is being used as his defence, which is such a funny way of putting it, and it does seem like Virginia's lawyer, David Boies, seems to agree with that. He argued in court that her prior dismissal of potential defendants should be 1, subject to jurisdiction of Florida courts, and 2, one who engaged in conduct at issue there, i.e. federal sex trafficking.
Oh, God.
So he's saying that in order to be a potential defendant, you need to have been involved in sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Why do Andrew's team think that this is like a good look for him?
Yeah, and the fact that they are relying so much on the settlement agreement and this argument seems to imply that the priority for them is getting this case dismissed. Like, more than anything, they do not want Andrew to end up in court, and rather than trying to clear Andrew's name or restore his reputation or anything, they just want to end this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because, we'd heard stuff last year about how it was Andrew's, priority to get his reputation back and rejoin public life. And, the way to do that is to win in court. It's not to get the case dismissed on a technicality, especially not one where you're basically saying that you are possibly guilty in order to get out of it.
Yeah, and I've seen this week royal reporters have been saying possibly the only way for Andrew to come out of this alive is for him to clear his name, to go to court and be found innocent.
Yeah, absolutely.
But clearly that is no longer his focus. As we're recording this right now, there hasn't been any decision on whether or not the case will be dismissed or go to trial. Although, according to that piece in Sunday Times, the judge, Lewis Kaplan, indicated that the argument seemed spurious and that he was veering in the direction of allowing the case to go to a full trial in the autumn.
Yeah, and if you look at what people are saying about the kind of questions that the judge was asking, at one point he asked about a section of the settlement agreement which said that the terms of the agreement are not to be used in any other case by any other person. So, he's actively pointing out parts of this settlement agreement that David Boies could rely on to show that it isn't relevant in this instance.
Yeah, and this wasn't the only argument Andrew's lawyers put forward, though. They had previously tried to get the case dismissed on the grounds that Virginia doesn't live in the US.
Yeah.
And as well as that, Lisa Bloom was live tweeting the case. Now, I think we've mentioned her before. She's a trial lawyer who works with victims of discrimination and abuse, including some of the alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein. But she also defended Harvey Weinstein and tried to portray his victims as mentally unstable. So she's quite a complicated figure. But she live tweeted the hearing anyway to give an idea of the kinds of arguments that the defense was putting forward, including that the New York law extending the statute of limitations to give victims of child sexual abuse more time to sue is unconstitutional.
Yeah, which, Virginia's lawyers pointed out it's been held up as constitutional in court in the US, and the judge didn't have any problem with that. But yeah, Lisa Bloom said that Andrew doesn't just want to block Virginia's access to justice, he wants to block all child sexual abuse victims' access by bringing up this statute of limitations. And she also said, Prince Andrew has now done a complete reversal of his prior position that he would fully cooperate with any investigation into sexual abuse in Epstein's orbit.
Yeah, I think we all saw that as a pretty flimsy promise at the time, and now it's been shown up as a completely hollow promise. Some other things to note about Andrew this week is that he has been unable, if you can believe it, to present any evidence to support his claims that he's incapable of sweating.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat.
And he's also failed to produce any witnesses who can vouch for his infamous Pizza Express alibi, which I thought was particularly interesting given that he supposedly took Beatrice there for a classmate's birthday party.
Yeah, and you'd think, it may be one thing that he doesn't want to involve his daughter, but I can imagine that anybody that ever worked in a Pizza Express and met Prince Andrew would remember.
Yeah, and it's not even a case of them being okay, we need to find 20 families, random families from the Woking area who might have been in Pizza Express on that particular evening. This was a school-related thing with parents there who presumably would remember the birthday party where a princess came. At very least, Beatrice going, if they didn't remember if Andrew dropped her off or not. So, it's just very odd to me that there were no witnesses for that.
Yeah.
And I remember it weirdly distinctly. As soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that.
And then finally, at the end of this Sunday Times piece, a royal source is quoted saying, "The problem is that Andrew's being advised as an individual rather than as part of an institution, the monarchy. There's been a failure throughout to understand that." And that really stood out to me, I think, because as we have seen over the years, the royal family have tried to distance themselves from Andrew and stay out of all of this Epstein mess. But as we have said before, given the rumours that the Queen is supposedly paying for his legal defence, which is now believed to be in the millions, and his position as her possibly former, but nonetheless favourite son. I don't think anyone's really going to believe that Andrew has been completely shut out unless the Queen does something like cutting him off financially, kicking him out of Royal Lodge, his home in Windsor, stripping him of his titles, or some other kind of definite, permanent indication that he's no longer a member of the royal family.
Yeah, I mean, and given that, like, the last thing we really heard about it was that the Queen wanted him to, like, retain his various military honorary titles and positions and stuff, like, that's very contrary to that.
Yeah, she's done the complete opposite of that.
But yeah, like, if Andrew is found guilty, the fact that he was operating as an individual is not going to help the reputation of the monarchy as an institution, like, especially if it's the Queen's money that ends up being used to pay any damages.
Yeah, Marina Hyde had an interesting piece in The Guardian this week where she was saying that that could be the turning point. That it's one thing that people maybe aren't that fussed about the Queen paying Andrew Siegel's fees because nobody really knows how much they are, but that if there is this huge sum that he has to pay in damages and the Queen is the one bailing him out, that people might really sit up and take notice in a way that they don't when she's spending money on, like, Balmoral or horses or whatever, that could be a major issue for the royal family down the line. And hopefully it doesn't take that long.
Well, yeah, I mean, we know that the royals really don't want people looking at their finances. And I think that, you know, monarchists will say that the Queen's private wealth is hers to do with what she likes. It's not in any way related to her public office. But, like, I'm sorry, you can't amass that kind of wealth and say that it's got nothing to do with you being the Queen. Like, it will raise massive questions for a lot of people and prompt a lot of debate, I think, about how the Queen is able to have what she has.
Yeah, and I think if people see their head of state giving 10 or 15 million or however much is basically blood money for a son who's been involved in sex trafficking claims, then I think that's going to stir up some problems.
A glorious revolution.
We can only hope. But I think if the institution of the monarchy is worried about all this bad advice that Andrew is getting, you know, rather than washing their hands completely of Andrew as Prince Charles and Prince William seem to be doing, I feel like they should maybe wake up to the fact that Andrew's team are only making it worse. And they don't seem to be willing to jump in. And that could be hurting them as well, because this go-to tactic of silence isn't working for anyone.
Yeah, they either need to cut him off completely or they need to step up and get involved if they want to have any hope of salvaging the monarchy's reputation at all. But in very different royal news, on Sunday, Kate turned 40.
Pretty sure everybody on Earth knows about this, because you could not move for coverage of Kate's big milestone birthday in the days, nay, weeks leading up to this birthday.
Yeah, basically since Christmas there's been like an overload of Kate content, and perhaps most notably for us, the Daily Mail published a piece on New Year's Eve by Rebecca English about Kate's upcoming birthday, with a whole host of sources coming out of the woodwork to sing her praises.
Yeah, and I think we say this every time they do this, but it's so funny and so embarrassing to me whenever a member of the royal family authorises their friends or former employees to talk to the press about how great they are. Like, I get that they see it as part of their job and that's how their media relations work. But it never fails to be incredibly obvious.
Yeah, and they're all up to it all the time. But, you know, if you are going to do it, maybe you should give them a few pointers first, I think, because it's mainly Kate's private secretary, Rebecca Priestley, who is the kind of like named source in this. And she starts off in the piece talking about the period of time just after Will and Kate were married, when they were deciding what to do. And she says, Catherine had clearly put a lot of thought into it and made very clear that for her, it was about listening and learning. And she says that apparently Will had said they needed to take their time, and another of the couple's like collaborators told Rebecca English that's exactly what she has done, with William as her guide. He's encouraged her to do things gradually, saying, this is for you to work out how you want to do it. He may not shout from the rooftops about equality, but theirs is a true partnership. I mean, it's just very, very clear that there is no way of, like, recasting Kate as, like, this work-focused, energetic person. It's, like, slowly, catchy early years. Like...
I think this probably will work for some people, though.
Yeah.
That they would probably look at this and be like, oh, that's what she was doing. Okay, that kind of explains it then. Because it seemed to me like she wasn't doing any work, but actually she was just doing it really gradually.
Well, apparently, Kate realised it would be a fool's errand to try to take on Diana's mantle. Instead, she assumed more the Queen Mother's steel marshmallow character, which I thought was such a fucking weird term, steel marshmallow. Is that something that's, like, well known? Do people always say that about the Queen Mum?
Well, it's like, remember when Prince Charles called Meghan, he had a nickname for Meghan that was like tungsten or something? Like something that meant like steel?
Yeah. Find your royal nickname. Take your favourite metal with your favourite sweet.
But Rebecca Priestley goes on to say of Kate, she wanted to learn. There were a lot of under-the-radar visits, and she saw people privately to help her understand the issues she wanted to put her name to. These were lifelong decisions she was taking. She wanted to have credibility when she spoke, and that actually takes huge strength of character.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot it takes huge strength of character not to do any work for 10 years.
I find this a fascinating way of reframing the narrative. I think some people will find this persuasive. Like, instead of seeing her as dragging her heels, they will think, oh, this was actually true wisdom, that she refused to buy into her overnight popularity. She was in this for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean, I really pity the people who are being swept along in this rebrand. But another great point is actually she's done loads of stuff that she's too polite to even admit to having done. Heads Together, which is that mental health campaign fronted by William, Harry and Kate, was apparently her idea. Not that she would ever be so self-absorbed as to tell you that, another friend tells Rebecca English.
I swear we've been told this so many times over the years. I've heard this from people that don't even follow the royals that closely. Oh, did you know Heads Together was actually Kate's idea?
She'd never tell you, but she would definitely authorise a friend to tell you. It probably shouldn't be surprising, given that she holds this position in one of the most, like, antiquated institutions in the whole entire world. But this attitude to talking about Kate is so old-fashioned. It's like, oh, she's a good woman who won't go on and on about herself and her achievements, unlike somebody else we could mention. But, like, we'll get to the stuff about Meghan in a bit. But, like, that's definitely what's being implied here.
Yeah, and I think we should remember how incredibly modest Kate is.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Later.
Yeah, just bear that in mind. But one of the funniest bits for me was this bit. Of course, they have help from their nanny and a housekeeper, but Kate is very much a hands-on mother, and as a member of staff says, it's all about organisation. And this is shortly followed by the same source saying, and nowadays she has much more confidence during the planning process to say, no, that is too much for that week.
Such confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like loads of parents without nannies and housekeepers would be delighted to be told that actually it's all about organisation, guys.
Tom, they just don't have the confidence.
But it does serve as a reminder that, like, these people absolutely set their own agendas and control the amount of work that they do. Like, it's a massive and very key difference between royal work and most people's lives. Like, most of us can't just say we want to do less work in a week for the same amount of money.
Yeah.
It's not how life works.
Yeah. But, you know, it's not just Kate's work ethics that are perfect. It's also the way she managed to fit so seamlessly into the royal family, despite a, you know, slightly tiny bit rocky start because of Prince Charles's jealousy.
Because she was so wonderful. The piece says, most notably, the Queen has nothing but admiration for her and feels comforted that the future of her dynasty appears assured. Prince Philip was also a particular source of support for Kate, often writing her very warm and loving letters. What's a loving letter from Prince Philip?
God, it's so strange, the emphasis on Kate's relationship with Philip, and how close they were and how he guided her and advised her. I don't think Kate should be taking advice from this old racist.
Yeah. Like, we got these, like, same stories from Will just after he died. And I just don't think that the general public think that being close with Prince Philip, famous racist, is as heartwarming a story as the royals seem to think it is.
I mean, maybe royalists would find that heartwarming.
I guess. But we should also say that it's apparently impossible to write a nice piece about Kate without bringing Meghan into it.
Jesus Christ. There was this awful piece in The Sun, an opinion piece by Petronella Wyatt, who described Kate as the beautiful Glinda to Meghan's Wicked Witch of the West.
Jesus Christ.
Among tons of other incredibly sexist and racist comments that don't bear repeating here. But I think it was an extremely heightened example of a lot of the sentiment that so often accompanies this glowing coverage of Kate, which involves obviously putting down Meghan, but usually it's in a more low-key dog whistle kind of way, and here it's on full blast.
Yeah. Like, back to the Rebecca English piece, they once again bring up all the stuff about how both Kate and now also Sophie Wessex were so welcoming to Meghan, but they were rebuffed. Like, Rebecca English says that, "I've been reliably told that the account which suggests it was Meghan's behaviour towards Kate's daughter, Charlotte, possibly over whether she should wear tights, that prompted the dispute is broadly true." So, like, once again bringing up this, like, she said kind of thing that's going on about tight gate, or whatever it is that we call it. But she also says that, meanwhile, the allegation that the notoriously private Kate schemed to have details of the incident leaked to the media, in fact there was a number of witnesses present, is laughable. In short, it is her maxim to stay out of family rows. I mean, I thought that Kate was, like, the ultimate peacemaker.
The peacemaker.
And, like, her involvement in family rows was to be this sort of soothing balm for all the hurt egos around her. But, like, I was also thinking, like, this isn't just, like, a family row that she's able to stay out of. Like, she is fundamentally involved in this story. Like, for her to stay out of it is, like, an action in itself.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you mentioned, the quote in it was that Kate felt she was very welcoming to Meghan.
Yeah. Which is, very different.
It's a different thing from actually being welcoming. A well-placed source says of Kate's approach, she treated the whole issue in terms of supporting her husband, who, while angry at some of what was being said and done, was largely just consumed with sadness about what was happening with his brother. Deeply aware how very, very upset William was, Catherine's focus was on supporting him and making sure that they, as a couple, never did anything that was contrary to their values. This is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, so, like, once again, Cambridges are the victims. Will is now also the one who is very, very sad.
Making it all about Will.
Yeah, it's just fucking more bullshit.
And just removing all this agency from Kate and being like, well, you know, she's there to prop up her man.
Yeah.
And that's her job. She is the king's wife. And that's all she's good for, but she's bloody good at it. Like, I think it's a gross way of talking about someone on their birthday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rebecca English goes on to say, like, the use of the word values in this is deliberate, given some of the heavily denied allegations about Meghan having mistreated palace staff. She says that she was told Catherine was focused on how her and William's staff were treated. I think it's mad that the royals or sources or whatever keep talking about the bullying stuff. Like, is this just them trying to get the most out of these bullying allegations while they can? Because we have not heard anything about the findings of the independent investigation into the claims against Meghan.
We may never
I mean, yeah, we may never. But it does seem like these sources are happy to take advantage of the fact that these kind of unproven allegations are, like, hanging in this sort of very nebulous form over Meghan's character.
Yeah, and Tom, I wonder if a well-placed source could tell us a little bit about Will's values. And while Kate is so busy making sure they never, as a couple, do anything contrary to their values, is Will as committed to those values? But if Kate was ever cold towards Meghan, it was only because her and Will are such a team. Because she was just being a team player. Basically.
Oh yeah, such a great team. They love sports, so they're always a team. But like recently people absolutely lost their minds over Will and Kate just looking at each other at Kate's carol service. And according to Rebecca English, in private they couldn't be tighter and rarely spend time apart aside from when working. And she also says there's a deep intimacy between the couple. All the big decisions are taken together. Their diaries are approved only after the other one has agreed. Oh, what intimacy.
This reminded me of that Demois submission that both of us were totally obsessed with about how Kate and Will were full on snogging at the BAFTAs or whatever.
Yeah.
Is similarly just very hard to believe.
The kind of like fan fictions that people write about Will and Kate, like there's so much insistence on their relationship being so strong. And I think when you have that much insistence, it just comes across as so forced, to me anyway.
Yeah, but you know what else felt a little bit forced to me, Tom? Was the Kate Middleton birthday photo shoot that we got today. I was shocked by this.
Yeah.
We had 3 photos of Kate, 3 ultra glamorous portraits in which she is wearing Alexander McQueen by Sarah Burton dresses. 2 of them are these wispy white princess dresses, very feminine, and then the other is a regal red poof-sleeved gown, and all 3 of them are either one shoulder or off the shoulder, Tom.
I mean, what a femme fatale. Am I right?
And on top of that, Tom, she has an expensive bedhead look. Would you call it a sort of just been shagged look?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm going to ask for when I go to the hairdresser next.
It was quite different. Like, we've seen her, she had hair like this at the Royal Variety performance in November.
And I actually read a story about how they had just shagged actually before that. So that would track.
But it is a big departure from the sausage curls.
Oh, yeah.
As we said then, I believe.
Yeah. And I do wonder if some people will miss the sausage curls.
The portraits were taken by Paolo Reversi, who is not British. He is an Italian-born, Paris-based fashion photographer. All of those things are very unroyal.
Yeah.
As well as that, he previously worked with Scarlett Johansson, Natalie Portman, and Rihanna.
Oh,
Tom.
wow.
He did some of my very favourite photos of Rihanna, including the Bitch Better Have My Money cover artwork and a lot of those promo images where she had the big eyebrows for Auntie.
Oh, amazing.
I do think, you know, all of that is so unusual for Kate or for any member of the royal family, really. And, you know, she obviously looks beautiful in these photos. Her smile feels really genuine and she looks comfortable. But it just seems like so far from the relatable brand that they have been laser focused on building for what feels like ages.
Yeah, and like we were saying something similar to that as well after the Christmas card photo of them on their secret holiday to Jordan. And we were like, what happened to Relatey Katie? But I mean, this seems, like a kind of vanity project, I think, and very celeb-y. And we've been reassured so many times that Kate's not into these kind of things.
It really reminded me of when there was all of the furore over Meghan Markle wearing that Ralph and Russo embroidered gown for the engagement portraits with Prince Harry, obviously. And people were going crazy about how much it cost and how this was such a celebrity style shoot. And it was like, okay, but those were the engagement portraits that everybody expected to get from them. Whereas this is a birthday photo shoot.
Yeah.
I've never, that doesn't even, those words don't make sense together.
Yeah, it sounds like something that you would like make fun of an Instagrammer for doing.
But I think this photo shoot, it just was another reminder, as we said around the time of the Bond premiere and stuff like that, that with Meghan and Harry gone, the royal family have lost so much star power and so much glamour, and this move seems like the royals recognizing that and trying to do something super flashy about it.
yeah, like realizing they need to make the most of what they have while they have it. But I do think it's just a shame, really, because we were both so into her big Bond premiere look, and that kind of did double duty because it was so glam, but it also felt very like warranted and appropriate to the event. And this kind of thing, like Kate basically organising her own little magazine shoot with 3 really expensive dresses, is...
In the middle of a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic, yeah, it's totally different. And I think the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it seems.
But, you know, happy birthday, Kate.
And, you know, remember, you should never be afraid to say, no, that's too much for that week.
Tom, I think that's just about enough for this week.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening.
And until next time, take care.
And have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, great gowns, beautiful gowns.